Okay, Aaron Mac BS detector here. Let me make sure the mic is still on. Okay. I don't know how much time this mic has before it dies. I got like 17 minutes into reading this to you guys, and the dog needed to go out, and I paused it, and then I thought that I started back recording from where I stopped, from where I paused, and it didn't. It just started all over. So like I just had to start all over because I didn't want to upload a 17-minute video of me reading. So we were at where Mr. Friedman here is saying that he suddenly became anti-Semite number one because he was speaking out against the Talmudist regime known as Zionism. Okay. So it is disgraceful to watch the Christian clergy take up the use of the word anti-Semitism. They should know better. They know that anti-Semitism is a meaningless word in the sense that it is used today. They know the correct word is Judeophobe. Anti-Semite was developed into the smear word it is today because Semite is associated with Jesus in the minds of Christians. Christians are accessories in the destruction of the Christian faith by tolerating the use of the smear word anti-Semitic to silence by the most intolerable forms of persecution employing that smear word. Christians who oppose the evil conspirators. It no doubt grieves you as much as it grieves me, my dear Dr. Goldstein, to see our nation's moral standards sink to new all-time lows day by day. Of that, there is very little doubt. The moral standards of this nation in political, economic, social, and spiritual fields are the factors which determine the position we will occupy in world affairs. We will be judged on that basis from afar by the other 94% of the world's total population. And that's facts, dude. Like the rest, I feel like the rest of the world hates us because of the war machine that we have that is utilized by the Zionist state of Israel. We're doing their dirty work. We just are. And we have been for 100 years. Okay. All right. Our 6% of the world's total population will succeed or fail in its efforts to retain world leadership by our moral standards because in the last analysis, they influence the attitudes and activities of the nation. The moral standards are the crucible in which the nation's character is refined and molded. The end product will never be any better than the ingredients used. It is something to think about. There is much for this Christian country can still feel very proud, but there is also much for which we cannot feel proud. A correct diagnosis of our nation's rapidly deteriorating moral standards in all walks of life will reveal the cause of the nation's current psychosis to concentrate primarily on how to, 1, make more money, and 2, have more fun. How many persons do you personally know who include among their daily duties service and sacrifice in the defense against its enemies of that priceless birthright in which the God-given heritage of all those blessed to be born Americans? What services? What sacrifices? And that's true, dude. You look around and all you see is, consumerism, of which I am totes guilty, okay? I'm a huge consumer of books and perfumes, but I try to, at least do some good deeds, in which this is one, trying to detect the BS and warn the people. I'm a watchman on the wall, letting y'all know what the hell is really going on here. Okay. Let's see. With very few exceptions, this generation seems to regard everything as secondary to our accountability to unborn generations for our generation's breach of the faith and betrayal of our trust to posterity. The sabotage of our nation's moral standards is more incidental to the program of that inimical conspiracy than accidental in the continued march of mankind towards an easier existence. The guidance and control of this nation's place in history has gravitated by default into the hands of those persons least worthy of that trusteeship. This notable achievement by them and their reward for their success in obtaining effective and numerous Christian male prostitutes to front for them, too many of these efficacious Christian male prostitutes are scattered throughout the nation and public affairs for the security of the Christian faith and the nation's political, social, and economic stability. That is so true. Like people like John Hagee, these Zionist pastors that literally think that the Zionist state of Israel is the God's chosen people and have been wrongfully teaching their congregants for decades. This BS now. Okay. Let's see. A quote unquote male prostitute is a male who offers the facilities of his anatomy from the neck up for hire to anyone who will pay his asking price, exactly as the female of the same species offers the facilities of her anatomy from the neck down to anyone who will pay her asking price. Thousands of pseudo-Christian male prostitutes circulate freely, unrecognized in all walks of life, proudly pandering pernicious propaganda for pecuniary profit and political power. Here's some alliteration for you. All the P words. They are the dog in the manger. The corroding effect of their subtle intrigue is slowly but surely disintegrating the moral fiber of the nation. This danger to the Christian faith cannot be overestimated. This peril to the nation should not be underestimated. The Christian clergy must remain alerted to it. The international crime of crimes of all history, that reprehensible iniquity in which this nation played the major role, was committed in Palestine almost totally as a result of the interference of the United States in that situation on behalf solely of the Zionist Worldwide Organization with its headquarters in New York City. The interference of the United States in that situation on behalf of the aggressors illustrates the power exerted upon the domestic and foreign policies of this government by the male prostitutes, fearlessly functioning on behalf of the Zionist conspirators. It is the blackest page in our history. The responsibility for that unchristian, non-Christian, and anti-Christian cause can be honestly deposited on the doorstep of the Christian clergy. They must assume the full guilt for that inhumane and unholy crime committed in the name of Christian charity. Sunday after Sunday, year in, year out, the Christian clergy denned into the years of 150 million Christians who go to church regularly that Christians must regard it as their Christian duty to support the Zionist conspiracy for the conquest of Palestine. Well, we sowed a wind, and now we will reap a whirlwind. The 150 million Christians in the United States were high-pressured by the Christian clergy to give their unqualified support to the Zionist program to repatriate to their homeland in Palestine the so-called or self-styled Jews in Eastern Europe who were the descendants of Khazars. Christians were exhorted by the Christian clergy to regard the so-called or self-styled Jews in Eastern Europe as God's chosen people and Palestine as their promised land. But they knew better all the time. It was a case of cupidity, not stupidity. You can be sure. As a direct result of the activities of the male prostitutes on behalf of the Zionist program, and contrary to all international law, to justice and to equity, anything to the contrary, notwithstanding the 150 million Christians in the United States, with few exceptions, demanded that the Congress of the United States use the prestige and the power of this nation, diplomatic, economic, and military, to guarantee the successful outcome of the Zionist program for the conquest of Palestine. This was done, and the Zionists conquered Palestine. We are responsible. Yes, we are. It is a well-established and undeniable historical fact that the active participation of the United States in the conquest of Palestine on behalf of the Zionists was the factor responsible for the conquest of Palestine by the Zionists. Without the active participation of the United States on behalf of the Zionists, it is certain that the Zionists would never have attempted the conquest of Palestine by force of arms. Palestine today would be an independent sovereign country under a form of government established by self-determination of the lawful and legal Palestinians. This was aborted by the payment of countless millions of dollars to Christian male prostitutes by Zionists on a scale difficult for the uninitiated to even imagine. And like most Christians don't even know that this even happened. They still just think that the people over there are God's chosen people. It's like, shut up. Like, and that's what really, really is like the most annoying thing, is there are so many know-nothing Christians out there that like are trying to preach to us as if they know something, and they don't know shit. Okay. With your kind permission anticipated, I beg to respectfully and sincerely now submit to you here my comments on several passages in your latest article, which appear to be the September issue of the APJ Bulletin under the headline, News and Views of the Jews. Deep down in my heart, my dear Dr. Goldstein, I truly feel that I can make a modest contribution towards the big success I wish you and the valuable work you are attempting under such discouraging handicaps. My reactions to what you state in your article may prove helpful to you. My comments here were conceived in that spirit. May I suggest that you favor them with your consideration accordingly? I feel that you may be so close to the trees that you cannot see the forest in its true perspective. You may find a genuinely sincere outsider's point of view helpful to you in orienting your yesterday's attitudes to today's realities and to tomorrow's seemingly certain probabilities. I believe you will. You realize, my dear Dr. Goldstein, that all laws of nature are irrevocable. Laws of nature can neither be amended, suspended, or repealed, regardless of how we feel about them. One of these laws of nature is fundamentally the basic reason, quote, all caps, why Jews become Catholics. The subtitle in your article, which attracted my attention, the law of nature to which I refer, is the law that, quote, all caps, to every action there is an equal and opposite reaction. In my respectful opinion, that law of nature is the alpha and omega of all questions as to why Jews become Catholics. In your article, you make this mystery sound very complicated. However, it really is very simple. The so-called or self-styled Jews who become Catholics today are subconsciously reacting to that law of nature. The conversion to Catholicism of the so-called or self-styled Jews is the equal and opposite reaction of that law of nature. Their conversion is not an action. Can you any longer doubt that after reading these facts? Catholicism has proven itself spiritually equal and opposite reaction of the religious worship today practiced today under the name Judaism, and prior to that name under the names Talmudism and Phariseeism. What is spiritually conspicuous in Catholicism is conspicuous by its absence in so-called Judaism. What is spiritually conspicuous in so-called Judaism is conspicuous by its absence in Catholicism. Thank God. Anything which may be said by anyone to the contrary, notwithstanding Catholicism and so-called Judaism, are at the opposite extremes of the spiritual spectrum, and that's facts. Our subconscious mind never sleeps. It remains awake all the while the conscious mind is asleep. This subconscious mind of the so-called or self-styled Jews is why Jews become Catholics. The more spiritually sensitive subconscious minds of so-called or self-styled Jews for 2,000 years has been seeking a spiritually secure beachhead as a refuge from the terror of the Talmud. After a lifetime breathing the atmosphere of the Talmud, so-called or self-styled Jews found Catholicism a wholesome and refreshing change of spiritual climate. They could not resist the spiritual force of the equal and opposite reaction which attracted them to Catholicism. And let me just pause right here and say maybe he's being a little bit too charitable towards these Jews. I think that it was a conscious subversion, a conscious what's the word I'm trying to think of? Infiltration, if you will. Sorry for me not being so charitable towards these people. Catholicism supplied a sacred sanctuary for the more spiritually sensitive subconscious mind of the so-called or self-styled Jew, security in his escape from the Talmud, before sailing into the safe port of Catholicism. The subconscious mind of the more spiritually sensitive or so-called self-styled Jew is tossed like a ship in a storm which has lost its rudder. When the ship anchors safely in the port of Catholicism, spiritual peace of mind is restored, and the ship remains securely at anchor in that safe port. Many millions of so-called or self-styled Jews would embark upon that voyage of their more courageous co-religionists, but for one reason: they fear reprisals by their co-religionists. In your article, you mentioned just a few of the many penalties imposed by reactionary or so-called self-styled Jews upon their co-religionists who become converts to Catholicism. Conversion to Catholicism has even deprived many former or so-called self-styled Jews from earning their living. Many families face starvation for that reason. A convert to Catholicism must be ready and willing to suffer the economic, social, and political hardships his former co-religionists will make him pay as the price for the spiritual wealth he will acquire with conversion to Catholicism, which I don't think is equal to Christianity, but that's for another video. Investigation by you will convince you that so-called or self-styled Jews never turned spiritually to Catholicism because such was the Jewish religion, because such is the Catholic religion. As you state in your article, a so-called or self-styled Jew might question the wisdom of conversion from the original to a copy of the original, inasmuch as so-called Judaism is a modern name for Talmudism, and Talmudism is a name given to the ancient practice of Phariseeism. How can you reconcile what you state that such was a Jewish religion, such as the Catholic religion? Several so-called or self-styled Jews who were recently converted to Catholicism are my personal friends. Not one of those whom I have asked became a Catholic because they felt the Catholic Church is the Jewish church glorified. As you stated in your article, what Jewish church, they ask me. I am unable to answer. What Jewish church, I ask you? Phariseeism? Talmudism? Surely you would not venture the opinion that the Catholic Church is Phariseeism or Talmudism now glorified as Catholicism, would you? I think I would, but it must be quite apparent to you now that so-called or self-styled Jews who become converts to Catholicism do not believe that the Catholic Church, as you stated in your article, is the church of Jewish converts and their descendants. They do not regard Jesus as a convert to the Catholic Church. You include Jesus with others as you describe as Jewish converts to the Catholic Church. Jesus was not a Christian. He wasn't a Catholic, okay? Good Lord. In your article, you state, first came Christ, the Jew of Jews. Jesus was not a fucking Jew. I never heard that designation before. Is it original? Nor will converted so-called or self-styled Jews concur with at all with then came the apostles, all Jews. As you also state in your article, there is unquestionably too big an area of disagreement here to disregard the views of those who become converts to Catholicism, nor can these converts to Catholicism be made to believe as truth. Then came the thousands of the first members of the Catholic Church who were Jews. They were not Jews, they were Judeans, and it was not the freaking Catholic Church, bro. There was the Marcionite Church, which existed hundreds of years before. They called Marcion a heretic and like kicked him out. But I think that the Marcionite Bible was the first Bible. If I'm not incorrect. Okay. So, anyways, that statement appears incredible in the view of incontestable facts, but these facts may not have been available to you when you made it. I think Dr. Goldstein is a false convert. Okay, I think Dr. Goldstein had an agenda here, and I think that Mr. Friedman was perfectly correct in calling him out, although I think he gave him too much benefit of the doubt. That's what I'm gathering here, because this Dr. Goldstein seems to be a lying liar and practicing the Cole Nider prayer. Okay. If so-called or self-styled Jews believe what you state in your article, they would undoubtedly prefer to stay put spiritually in their Jewish church, by which you mean, no doubt, so-called Judaism. They would query why Catholics expected them to leave their Jewish church to enter the Catholic Church. It might appear more logical to expect Catholics to return to the original of the Catholic Church, the Jewish Church, or so-called Judaism, on the basis of what you state. That would not be inconsistent. You take away my breath when you further state Catholicism would not exist here, it not for Judaism. That leaves very little for me to say after writing these pages of facts and comments. In a certain sense, there is a certain sense to what you state if you feel that the existence of so-called Judaism in the time of Jesus and since then created the necessity for the existence of Catholicism. But in no sense can the Catholic Church be adjudicated to the projection of Phariseeism, Talmudism, or so-called Judaism. We should get together in person to go over this matter more fully. I hope you will extend that privilege to me in the not-so-distant future. In closing this letter, I sincerely request that you bear in mind while reading this letter Galatians 4:16. Am I therefore your enemy because I tell you the truth? And to this I add, I hope not. I hope that we shall continue to be the very best of friends. If the Christian faith is to be rescued from its dedicated enemies, we must all join hands and form a human lifeline. We must pull together, not in different directions. We must bury the hatchet, but not in each other's heads. Looking forward with pleasant anticipation to the delight of meeting with you in person whenever you find it convenient and agreeable for yourself, and awaiting your early reply, for which I take this opportunity to thank you in advance, and with best wishes for your continued good health and success. Please believe me to be most respectfully and very sincerely, Benjamin H. Friedman. He signed it right there. Okay. Now, I guess this is the epilogue. I don't know. Is that what it's called? Okay. So we're going to read this. It's called The Hidden Tyranny. Okay. This is the after the letter was signed, sealed, delivered. I don't know if this was written. I guess this is like, something after the letter. The names of Presidents Woodrow Wilson, Franklin D. Roosevelt, Harry S. Truman, Dwight D. Eisenhower, John F. Kennedy, Lyndon B. Johnson, and Richard M. Nixon will certainly be found one day inscribed in big red letters in the official annals of the rise and fall of the United States. These 7 masters of deception incurred their guilt by debasing their solemn oaths of office on behalf of undisclosed domestic and foreign principles without any apparent qualms or misgivings to enhance their political fortunes, totally oblivious of the threat to the United States security and survival. These 7 masters of deception knowingly and willingly, in effect and in fact, poisoned the wells of security and survival for the United States. That's wild that he's saying this even about Kennedy, who was like, I feel like, wasn't he trying to get us out of the Federal Reserve? Isn't that, quote unquote, why he was unalived? Anyways, which, who knows if that really happened? I mean, it could have been just another psyop like all the other ones, but who knows? Okay, let's see. Without any evident scruples, they individually betrayed the sacred traditions enshrined in the letter and spirit of their oath of office, that precious heritage bequeathed to each of these 7 masters of deception as successors to that high office exalted by the immortalized first president of the United States, the venerated George Washington, who was not the first president and was a Freemason, who was a part of this whole epic deception. But, that's neither here nor there either. The disclosures which follow here are now revealed for the first time anywhere. They now expose for the first time to the grassroots population of the United States the secret un-American, non-American, and anti-American strategy to which these 7 masters of deception knowingly subscribed. The uninhibited practice of that strategy by these 7 masters of deception is primarily responsible for desperate predicament in which the United States today find itself in the Middle East. Very early in their political careers, these 7 masters of deception, by their determination, acquired their proficient skill in detecting on which side their political bread was buttered. Their remarkable perfection in that skill provides the answer to why these 7 masters of deception went so far and so fast in so few years in the political world in which they moved. Throughout their political career, these 7 masters of deception demonstrated that political shrewdness, invariably identified with the immoral dogma of the 20th century politicians who preach and practice any means justifies all ends. Accordingly, future grassroots populations of the United States will one day find inscribed in the history of the rise and fall of the United States the verdict that the means today advocated by these 7 masters of deception were primarily responsible for the end of the United States. It is today a well-recognized fact of life in political circles in the United States that the censorship exercised today by Zionists over the media for mass information constitutes a virtual monopoly. And we know that's facts, right? Like, they own all of the media. They own everything. The banks, the food, the Hollywood, they own it all, okay? They own it all. It is likewise today a well-organized fact of life in political circles in the United States since President Wilson won his first election in 1912 as President of the United States that elections in the United States are seldom won or lost today based upon the candidates qualification for office. Elections in the United States since 1912 are won or lost on the battlefields of the media for mass information by character assassination. Zionist ownership of media for mass information or by Zionist control exercised by some devious corporate device in fact censors the news and editorial policies of as the leading daily and Sunday newspapers, all the weekly and monthly news magazines, all leading radio and television stations and networks, the entire motion picture industry, the entire entertainment world, and the entire book publishing industry. Interesting. In fact, the entire complex of media for mass information of the United States, truly a brainwashing monopoly. Like, I've been said that for like a decade. Okay, now there's a new header right here, and it says Talmudist Jews control news and editorial policies of mass media. Like, duh. As a result of that condition in the United States for approximately the past 50 years, and this was written like, 80 years ago or something. I don't know, 70, 80 years ago. So, yeah. Okay, let's see. As a result of that condition of the United States for approximately the past 50 years, the grassroots population of the United States has only read, heard, and seen what passed Zionist censorship and best served Zionist objectives instead of reading, hearing, and seeing what best served the interests of the grassroots population of the United States. The Zionist-ruled media for mass information in the United States never informed the grassroots population of the United States how and why President Woodrow Wilson led the United States into the desperate predicament in which the United States today finds itself in the Middle East. And their consideration recently of the alleged theft of the so-called Pentagon Papers, the United States Supreme Court declared the public has a right to know the truth. The Supreme Court should have said the public has a right to know the whole truth. The reason half-truths are often more harmful than lies. Does that ring any bells? Like the Epstein files? It's still the same fucking game they're playing on us here 80 years later, people. And we're worse off now than we probably were then. Because we're closer to the end game of these Zionists, which is total world domination, and the pulling down of Christendom, okay? For the past, I'm not going to say 2,000 years, because I don't even think we've been, I think we're in the little season, okay, in the book of Revelation. So I think that the last reset was probably just before, like, the formation of this country. I'm not really sure, but anyways, okay, I'm just going to stop right there on that, because some people will probably think I'm crazy, but I'm not crazy. I've just looked into a lot of stuff, and when you look into things and you research stuff, you do sound crazy to the woefully uninformed and the ignorant, okay? I'm not trying to, like, be a dick here. I'm just saying, like, if you don't read and you don't educate yourself, then, like, people who do read and who are educated, and I say educated, not indoctrinated, okay? There's a difference. They will sound crazy to you, okay? It will sound like craziness, but it's not craziness. It's facts. Facts. Okay? Anyways. Okay. The reason half-truths are more often harmful than lies. The United States declared war against Germany on April 6, 1917. On April 2nd, 1917, President Wilson addressed both houses of Congress and pleaded with them to declare war against Germany. President Wilson's appeal to Congress to declare war against Germany in fact was primarily President Wilson's liquidation of his obligation to his blackmailers, who are the Zionists. That's what they do. That's their game. The following incontestable facts confirm that conclusion beyond all question of any doubt. President Wilson's hand trembled as he read his address. The members of Congress present had no reason to suspect why President Wilson's hand trembled. By the time the grassroots population finished reading this, they will know the reason President Wilson's hand trembled as he read his message to Congress. By the time President Wilson finished reading his appeal to Congress, many of his listeners were in tears, but not for the reason the grassroots population of the United States today will be in tears when they finish reading this manuscript. When President Wilson asked Congress to declare war against Germany, President Wilson was in fact conspiring to pay the debt he obligated himself to pay to the Zionists, which every president has, including Trump. Congress only declared war against Germany because President Wilson informed Congress that a German submarine had sunk the SS Sussex in the English Channel in violation of international law, and that United States citizens aboard the SS Sussex had perished with the ship. After General Pershing's troops were fighting in Europe, the hoax was exposed. The alleged sinking of the SS Sussex was used as pretext to justify a declaration of war against Germany by the United States. Doesn't that sound familiar? 9/11. Okay, anyways. The SS Sussex had not been sunk, and no United States citizen had lost their lives. PSYOPs on PSYOPs on PSYOPs. The United States was now at war in Europe as Great Britain's ally. That is what Great Britain and the Talmudist Jews of the world conspired to achieve in their crooked diplomatic underworld. The discovery of the hoax by the British Navy shocked many honorable Englishmen. A large segment of British public were shocked to learn the SS Sussex had not been sunk. The SS Sussex was available for anyone to visit who might care to do so, to see the SS Sussex for themselves with their own eyes. In that war, the United States mobilized 4,734,991 men to serve in the armed forces, of whom 115,516 were killed, or unalived, and 202,002 were either injured or maimed for life. The Right Honourable Francis Neilson, a member of Parliament, wrote a book in England called Makers of War. And this is from pages 149 and 150. Mr. Neilson's book created such a sensation that Mr. Neilson was compelled to resign in his seat in Parliament. Things became so intolerable for Mr. Neilson in Great Britain as a result of the exposures in his book that he was compelled, for his personal safety, to flee from his home in Great Britain and to make his home in the United States. In Mr. Neilson's book, Makers of War, he discloses many unsuspected and undisclosed reasons for the outbreak of World War I in Europe in August 1914, with reference to the alleged sinking of the SS Sussex in the English Channel. Mr. Neilson emphasizes, in America, Woodrow Wilson, desperate to find a pretext to enter the war, found it at last in the sinking of the Sussex in mid-channel. Someone invented a yarn that American lives had been lost. With thus excuse, he went to Congress for a declaration of war. Afterward, the Navy found that the Sussex had not been sunk and that no lives had been lost. End quote. This author crossed the English Channel many times on the SS Sussex. The alleged sinking of the SS Sussex was a figment of an overworked Zionist imagination. The alleged sinking of the SS Sussex was conceived in the imagination of a Zionist to facilitate the purpose, planned, and successfully executed. Okay, now we go to President Wilson blackmailed. Shortly after President Wilson's first inauguration, he received a visitor in the White House by the name of Mr. Samuel Untermyer. Mr. Untermyer was a prominent New York City attorney who contributed generously to the National Democratic Committee that installed President Wilson in the White House in Washington in the 1912 election. Mr. Untermyer was a very welcome guest, and President Wilson was very glad to welcome him to the White House. They had met before during the campaign. Mr. Untermyer surprised President Wilson when he finally stated what brought him to the White House. Mr. Untermyer informed President Wilson that he had been retained to bring a breach of promise action against Mr. Wilson. Mr. Untermyer informed President Wilson that his client was willing to accept $40,000 in lieu of commencing the breach of promise action. Mr. Untermyer's client was the former wife of a professor at Princeton University. At the same time, President Wilson was a professor at Princeton University. See, it's the same old story with these people. Like, what was that, God, I can't even think of the guy's name, but there was a whole, I don't know if it was a senator or who it was, but it was these same accusations of sexual misconduct, and they blackmail people. It's crazy, dude. Like, nothing has changed in almost 100 years. Nothing has changed. Okay. Let's see. These letters established the illicit relationship which had existed between President Wilson and the wife of his colleague neighbor. He had written many endearing letters to her, many of which she never destroyed. President Wilson acknowledged his authorship of the letters after examining a few of them. President Wilson left the Princeton University to become governor of New Jersey. In 1912, he was elected to his first term as President of the United States. In the interim, President Wilson's former sweetheart had divorced her husband and married again. Her second husband was a resident in Washington with a grown son who was in the employ of one of the leading banks in Washington. Mr. Untermeyer explained to President Wilson that his former sweetheart was very fond of her husband's son. Wow, okay. He explained that this son was in financial trouble and suddenly needed $40,000, as he told the story, to liquidate a pressing liability to the bank for which he worked. The details are not relevant here except that the son needed the $40,000 badly and quickly. President Wilson's former sweetheart thought that Wilson was the logical prospect for that $40,000 to help her husband's son. Mr. Untermeyer visited President Wilson at the White House to break the news to him about the breach of promise action being considered. Wilson expressed himself as very fortunate that his former sweetheart went to Mr. Untermeyer to seek his assistance. The publicity could have proven very embarrassing to President Wilson if his former sweetheart had instead consulted a Republican attorney. President Wilson quickly set Mr. Untermeyer's mind at rest by informing him that he did not have $40,000 available for any purpose. Mr. Untermeyer suggested that President Wilson should think the matter over and that he would return in a few days to discuss the matter further. Mr. Untermeyer used the next few days in Washington to look into the credibility of the son's story about his pressing need for $40,000 to liquidate a pressing liability. He learned that the son's story was not misrepresented in any way to his mother by her son. Mr. Untermeyer returned to President Wilson a few days later, as they had agreed. President Wilson did not hesitate to inform Mr. Untermeyer that he did not have $40,000 to pay his blackmailer. President Wilson appeared irritated. Mr. Untermeyer considered the matter a few moments and then volunteered a solution to President Wilson for his problem. Mr. Untermeyer volunteered to give President Wilson's former sweetheart the $40,000 out of his own pocket on one condition: that Wilson promised Untermeyer to appoint to the first vacancy of the United States Supreme Court a nominee to be recommended to Wilson by Untermeyer. Without further talk, President Wilson accepted Mr. Untermeyer's generous offer, and Mr. Untermeyer promptly paid the $40,000 in currency to President Wilson's former sweetheart. The contemplated breach of promise suit was never heard of after that. Mr. Untermeyer retained in his possession permanently the packet of letters to ensure against any similar attempt at some future time. President Wilson was most grateful to Mr. Untermeyer for everything he was doing to solve the problem. Mr. Untermeyer was a man of great wealth. The law firm in New York, of which he was the leading partner, Messrs. Guggenheim, Untermeyer, and Marshall, is still today one of the nation's most prominent and most prosperous law firms. Mr. Untermeyer organized the Bethlehem Steel Company for his friend, Mr. Charles M. Schwab, who resigned from the United States Steel Company to form his company in competition with it. All right, now we go to Justice Brandeis, the payoff. As anyone might reasonably suspect, Mr. Untermeyer must have had something in mind when he agreed to pay President Wilson's former sweetheart $40,000 out of his own pocket. He paid the money out of his own pocket in the hope that it might bring to pass a dream close to his heart: a Talmudist Jew on the United States Supreme Court on which none had ever served. Well, now it's fucking full of them. The day soon arrived when President Wilson was presented with the necessity of appointing a new member of the United States Supreme Court. Mr. Untermeyer recommended Louis Dembitz Brandeis for the vacancy, who was immediately appointed by Wilson. President Wilson and Justice Brandeis became unusually intimate friends. Justice Brandeis knew the circumstances of his appointment to the Supreme Court by President Wilson. In 1914, Justice Brandeis was the most prominent and most politically influential of all Zionists in the United States. Of course he was. This video is probably going to go over 45 minutes because I'm going to try... I'm going to try to finish this. I may have to stop it and start over. And start again. Okay. As a justice of the United States Supreme Court, Brandeis was in a better position than ever before to be of service to Talmudist Jews, both at home and abroad. The first opportunity to perform a great service for his Zionist followers soon became available to Brandeis. Justice Brandeis volunteered his opinion to President Wilson that the sinking of the SS Sussex by a German submarine in the English Channel with the loss of lives of the United States citizens justified the declaration of war against Germany by the United States. Relying To a great extent upon the legal opinion of Justice Brandeis, President Wilson addressed both houses of Congress on April 2nd, 1917. He appealed to Congress to declare war against Germany, and they did on April 7th, 1917. After the October 1916 agreement was concluded between the British War Cabinet and the World Zionist Organization, the Talmudists throughout the world were hopeful that an international incident would soon occur to justify a declaration of war against Germany by the United States. The declaration of war against Germany by the United States guaranteed the Talmudists throughout the world that Palestine was to be turned over to them upon the defeat of Germany. The defeat of Germany was certain if the United States could be railroaded into the war in Europe as Great Britain's ally. Prior to the October 1916 London Agreement, Talmudists throughout the world were pro-German. The German Emancipation Edict of 1822 guaranteed Talmudists in Germany all civil rights enjoyed by Germans. Every country in Europe had quotas for Talmudists. The quota systems had existed for centuries in all European countries. Under the quota system in European countries, Talmudists were limited in all activities to a small percentage of the Christian population of the country. See, these Christians were smart. Today's Christians are not. I'm just going to say that. The quota systems applied to all occupations. After the Emancipation Edict in 1822, Germany was the only country in Europe which did not place restrictions on Talmudists under a quota system limiting their civil rights. Talmudists throughout the world were informed by cable from London about the October 1916 London Agreement. That information transferred them from pro-German to pro-British. Great Britain placed at the disposal of Talmudists in London their secret codes and worldwide cable facilities to inform Talmudists throughout the world about Great Britain's pledge to turn over Palestine to them as compensation for railroading the United States into the war in Europe as Great Britain's ally in their war against Germany. Talmudists enlisted in great numbers in October 1916 in Great Britain's Department of Defense. Their purpose was to facilitate transforming Talmudists throughout the world from pro-German to pro-British. After the London Agreement was concluded, Great Britain left no stone unturned to impress Talmudists in London with the necessity of immediately notifying Talmudists throughout the world about Great Britain's pledge to turn over Palestine to them for their future sovereign Zionist state. Guided by the recommendation of Justice Brandeis that the sinking of the SS Sussex justified a declaration of war under international law against Germany by the United States, President Wilson addressed a joint session of both houses of Congress on April 2nd, 1917. In that address, President Wilson pleaded with Congress to declare war against Germany. And I think we were like homies with Germany up until then. And then, of course, the propaganda machine that is owned by the Zionists started like turning Americans. I've been sitting on this stoop for a while. My butt's going numb. Anyways, let's see. Congress met. Okay, in that address, President Wilson pleaded with Congress to declare war against Germany. Congress met on April 6th, 1917, and declared war against Germany without justification. On April 6, 1917, President Wilson and Justice Brandeis knew something the grassroots population of the United States did not know. They knew full particulars about the October 1916 London Agreement. They also knew the declaration of war against Germany by the United States activated this agreement and that the Talmudists of the world would not have to wait long for Palestine, their sovereign Zionist state, if their plan worked. On this same day, Wilson and Brandeis knew something else grassroots Americans didn't know. They knew that the declaration of war by the United States against Germany discharged President Wilson from his obligation to his blackmailers. Wilson's declaration of war was to satisfy his commitment to his blackmailers. There was seldom any address made to Congress that stirred the people of the United States and the world, as did President Wilson's April 2nd, 1917 plea to Congress to declare war against Germany. Wilson was aware when he addressed Congress that Germany had not committed any act against the United States which justified a declaration of war by the United States against Germany under international law. This author at the time knew President Wilson was informed to that effect before he made his plea to Congress. Okay, we're coming up on 45 minutes, so I'm going to stop, and then I'm going to take a little break, and then I'm going to finish reading the rest of this book, because then I have another book that I got at the thrift store called Zionism that we're going to read together. All right. So this is part 8, I guess. And so we're going to stop, and then I'll see you in part 9.